Okay. Hello, professionals, and welcome to the boardroom hosted by BE Professional Consultancy. Though this is our boardroom, we promise that you will not be bored. My name is Dr. Erica Burks, and I am the Chief Human Resources Officer for our illustrious business. I am a highly skilled HR practitioner who has worn many hats, operated in several roles in various industries. With that being said, I am still the most unconventional HR professional you will ever meet, but trust me, you will absolutely love it here. One of the many things that I love to do is to bridge the gap between C-suite and the employee, and that is still my absolutely most proud component of my profession.
Well, greetings, professional. I'm Dr. Ellison. I'm one part of Be Professional Consultancy. I'm a veteran and expert in leadership and professional development. I have over 2 decades of experience, and I enjoy helping you improve from the janitor to the C-suite. Dr. Burks and I have had some traumatic experiences because of workplace unprofessionalism, executive disengagement, and lack of accountability. We hope to leverage our experiences so that you can get better results in your workplace. The topic we'll discuss today is burnout. That's one I can't wait to have with you. Today we'll talk about what burnout is, how it impacts you in the workplace, who ultimately owns it, and what you can do about it. I just couldn't help but to nail down why I was always so tired after having enough hours of uninterrupted sleep. Why my doctor's concern about my well-being brought me to near tears. But burnout due to overcommitment, lack of boundaries, and people-pleasing had me, an otherwise strong and always put together high-performing leader, laid up in a cat machine, having my brain scanned. In combination with some work-related injuries, I wasn't helping myself with the constant hustling. So I wanted to start with a few quotes that helped me. In the book, The Art of Being Indispensable at Work, the author, Bruce Tulgan, says, "Sadly, even the best attitude and most diligent work ethic aren't enough to keep overcommitment syndrome at bay. Nobody can work enough hours with a big enough smile to do everything for everybody all the time." And one of my favorite books, Psalm 19, verse 143 reads, "As pressure and stress bear down on me, I find joy in your commands." The commands teach us that rest is mandatory, that worry won't add a single moment to our lives, and that seeking God first for wisdom is how we find success. And before we start to talk to you about burnout, just know that this is a commonly used word to describe our stress and our fatigue. If you find that you are having a mental health crisis, we are not medical professionals, and I would encourage you to call the crisis hotline at 988 or text the hotline at 988 or make an appointment with your mental health professional as soon as you can possibly get in. Dr. Burks?
Well, it is tradition for Dr. Ellison to provide our formal definition of our topic, so I would love for you to weigh in on the official definition of burnout.
Now, bear with me, professionals, but did you know that burnout is in the International Classification of Diseases, aka ICD-10, 10 being the latest version of ICD. You can find these codes on the Centers for Disease Control website or the World Health Organization or the WHO site. Be patient with the science today, professionals. Building a solid foundation is important. The ICD is how we code and classify medical diagnoses and causes of death. This is how they generate your medical bills. Did you know that? There's an ICD for a new patient appointment, for example. So burnout is classified by the CDC ICD-10 as code Z like in zebra, Z73. Problems related to life management difficulty, or code Z73.0, burnout. And socioeconomic or psychosocial is excluded from that definition. Please note this, professionals, that this is not a medical condition. It is considered an occupational phenomenon. Dr. Burks.
So I wanted to cover burnout because Dr. Ellison and I think can attest, don't let me speak for you, that we have experienced it on a multitude of occasions. We have worked with people who have experienced it. We have loved ones and friends who have experienced it. And so it was near and dear to me to address this topic because I feel like there are a lot of misconceptions concerning it. And I thought it just made sense to break it down and to just give you a different perspective. So when you think about burnout, you typically think about work. If I were to say I am just so burnt out, the first thing that you will naturally associate it with is being work. But what if I told you that burnout can start at home as well and trickle into the workplace, which most people wouldn't assume that, and I didn't either. But Integris Health offered a different perspective of burnout because sometimes it is misconstrued as stress. So they're not as interchangeable as you would think that they would be. But I believe, or they believe, I should say, that burnout is when you feel like you don't have enough time, enough energy, motivation, not enough of anything. On the contrary, they believe that stress is when you feel like you have too much on your plate and you're having a hard time balancing things. And so hearing that, Dr. Ellison, I would love to know, just on that snippet, what do you think about that?
I think that's a good definition that you gave, but I really do think it's important for the professionals that are watching today to know that this is a well-researched topic. Burnout has been researched going all the way back to the 1960s. This was something that usually affected public health workers, and usually those that were found to be in professions such as healthcare. And if you can think back to the pandemic, you heard a lot about that as we talked about our nursing staff and how they were getting burnt out and caring for our patients during the pandemic. But since 2014, we now know it to be in a wide variety of work. So just to add on to what Dr. Burks just defined it for you, burnout is defined as, and this is by the CDC, as I mentioned earlier, and the World Health Organization, as chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It has characterized by 3 dimensions. Let's see if you recognize any of these 3 dimensions. Number 1, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. Number 2, increase in mental distance from one's job, feelings of negativity and cynicism. And number 3, reduced professional efficacy. And if you haven't experienced one of those 3, if not all of them, I'm sure you've probably witnessed those in your coworkers. But this is a mathematical problem. Get your pencils and your papers, professionals. This is how they defined truly how you can classify burnout. This is a math problem. Too many demands that require effort plus not enough resources to meet that demand equal burnout. And I remember that I am a veteran, as I mentioned in my introduction. We would classify a mass cow. You would think that would be a lot of patients, but one patient can be classified as a mass cow if you don't have enough resources to take care of that one patient. So too many demands that require your effort and not enough resources to meet that demand can equate to burnout. Or Mismatched demands plus poor personal coping and emotion management can equate to burnout. Dr. Burks?
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow. Just saying. So I'm learning. She's teaching me something as we go. That's why I love having these conversations, because I'm being educated and informed just like you. So, like I said, burnout can happen at home. It is a different spectrum, I guess I should say, than when you feel burnout at work. But in researching, and then Dr. Ellison brings all of the receipts and the stats. And then on my side, I'll go into my personal experiences. So with burnout, I've known for it to be emotional, physical, and behavioral. Many organizations that I've worked in, you have like a honeymoon phase. I felt very optimistic. I came into the job wanting to make a difference. And then it transitioned into chronic stress. And then it was just like, I want to make a difference. I'm trying. It doesn't really seem like my efforts are working. And then it transitioned into chronic burnout. And with chronic burnout, that is when my performance became affected. That is when my morale changed, my desire to interact with people changed, even the ability to sleep at night. So my job was living rent-free in my head, even when I was not working. So research shows that when evaluating mental health in 2024, 44% of employees in the U.S. felt burnt out. 45% felt emotionally drained, and 51% of employees felt depleted. The question is, how did we get there? Dr. Ellison, I'm so interested to see what you think.
I think those are some profound statistics. But one thing I do want to note, Dr. Burks, with that being said, other research suggests that work is one of the first things that gets the blame when we talk about burnout. Mm-hmm. And so as we recognize that as an occupational phenomenon, a lot of times work is usually not the issue for burnout, and it's a good place to start. So if you feel like you're at work and you're burnt out, like those math formulas I gave you a little bit ago, that's a good place to start. Mm-hmm. So looking at your life, your work life, and figuring out, do we have enough resources? And are we overextending ourselves in the workplace? And like Dr. Burks mentioned, what are some other areas of my life that I need to take a look at? And the CDC and the World Health Organization, they do have some prevention strategies, and that's why it is so important for professionals. One of the things that they recommend is to take the total worker health, because you can't just take a look at one aspect of your life. If you're burnt out at home, that gets in the car with you and it rides with you to work. If you're burnt out at the workplace, it doesn't just stay in your cubicle at work. It gets in the car with you and it rides back with you home to pick up your kids and, while you're with your spouse and your family. So part of the prevention is to consider the whole person. So the CDC, and there's an acronym, NIOSH, NIOSH. That's the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health Promotion. It's the total worker health. And I am going to give you some tools before I let you go today, which is a holistic model for improving workforce safety, health, and well-being. They also have education to help with workplace stress, which is a big deal, absenteeism, emergency preparedness, fatigue, and topics like the future of work with robotics and AI. Those things that you can see run parallels as we talk about the topic of burnout. What's going to happen with my job? Is AI going to take over my job? If I'm burnt out, that will contribute to my workplace stress. That will contribute to absenteeism at work, right? fatigue at work. And so the CDC and the NIOSH, these are public-facing websites that have training materials that supervisors and managers can use to help their employees. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But this is just such a critical topic because, like I told you at the top of this conversation, I consider myself a high performer, just go, go, go. But all of that people pleasing, that lack of boundaries, that overextending myself, that not communicating about the resources that I needed to do my job contributed to the burnout. And so we're hoping to equip you and give you some tools that you can personally use yourself. And for the managers and the leaders in the room, you don't have to wait for the people in the C-suite and those executives. If you should be considering the total worker. When you sit down to do performance appraisals, when you see that one of your workers, something is off with them, you have resources. The government has spent an enormous amount of time and money developing these training modules and doing this research so that we can have workforce safety, because believe it or not, having a burnt out doctor or nurse, that impacts patient safety, workplace safety, somebody doing your hair that's burnt out, a mechanic working on your car that's burnt out. I mean, I can think of a number of occupations where you don't want the people working there to be burnt out, just not to mention, the impact that has on your marital relationships and your relationship with your kids and in your communities and whatnot. Dr. Burks?
She dropped a bunch of gems, if I may say so myself. And for me, I feel like burnout is so preventable, and utilizing, for example, the resources that Dr. Ellison mentioned, that is a preventative measure. I always like to use the analogy that if you burn food, and I mean burnt it to a crisp, can you unburn it? What can you do with it? And so oftentimes, and especially if using myself as an example, when I become burnt out at work, it is very difficult to refocus. It is very challenging for me to rebuild that morale because I feel depleted. It makes you feel defeated. And oftentimes, especially during COVID, there was, I had a nurse, phenomenal nurse, but she was working like crazy, kept working, picking up shifts. She wanted to be a team player. And then one day we walked in the room and found her sleeping with a patient. And as from the outside, it looks unprofessional because, technically it is. When you dig a little deeper, you realize she is exhausted. There's such a demand, and Dr. Ellison is the healthcare guru. That is like her strong suit. I will say that. She's a wealth of knowledge concerning that, but how do we fix that? So yes, we could give disciplinary action to the nurse, but will that change the burnout that she is experiencing? So it's more than there's an acute issue behind that. And so for me, I personally feel like this is a part of employee management. This is a part of, engaging. We talk about engagement a lot. That is one of my most favorite topics to discuss. But we have to make our employees' mental health a priority as well. So we focus on, okay, what time are they showing up to work? What is the quality of care, performance? But what about what is going on in their mind? And the reason why I wanted to lead with the fact that burnout can also happen at home is because people have real life going on. They don't walk into the facility and they are a whole person, and then when they walk out, they disappear. They have real life going on at home. And so sometimes they do come to work and they have pre-existing stressors, and then they get stressed at work, and then they, it turns into, or it creates a domino effect, I guess, for a lack of a better term. And how do we fix it? We can identify it, we can provide resources, but is it something that you can fix? When someone becomes burnt out, how do you change it? Now, a lot of times when I pose this question to professionals that I personally work closely with, when it comes to work, they say no. Well, once I get to this point, there's nothing I can do about it. So then I pose the other question, Dr. Ellison, that I would love for you to weigh in on. How do you get rid of burnout at home? So you leave the job, okay, if that's your solution, but what if that burnout is triggering or initiated at home? Is there anything they can do?
I take it that wasn't a rhetorical question.
Mm-hmm.
So I shared with Dr. Burks a number of years ago when I started my graduate program. My professor had the class, my cohort, do an assignment. He wanted us for about 2 weeks to record our time for 15-minute increments, in 15-minute increments. I learned so much from that lesson, and it sounds very tedious. He made us fill out an Excel spreadsheet every 15 minutes. We had to log what we were doing. Guess what I found out about myself? Little Miss Busybody. Little Miss always on the go, running around taking care of everybody. I found out that I wasn't as busy as I thought I was. But what I learned about myself was that I was overcommitting myself. I had a lack of boundaries with family and with friends. I didn't speak up for myself when there was a lack of resources. I made it look easy. I was burning myself out with self-imposed things that I thought people were self-imposed expectations. I'll say it like that. Instead of outwardly communicated expectations. Those are things that can burn us out. And it was making me sick. So self-awareness is a huge part of dealing with burnout, and how you can start to make some adjustments at home, which will translate into the workplace, is doing some self-assessment. What are some things that I am personally doing? Because if God thought it was important to rest, first of all, if God rested, who are we to think that we can go 7 days a week and not take a rest? Who are we? That is so prideful. That is so boastful to think that we can go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, taking everybody to cheerleading practice and football camp and being everywhere for everybody all the time. Even God said that we need to take a rest and dedicated an entire day to it. But if we don't know how we're expending our time, if we don't know what resources we need and start to plan and forecast what we're doing, if we don't even have a strategy for our own selves, how can we expect others to do that for us? And one thing I started to do was carry around a planner. And when other people saw that I had a demand on my own time, they started to respect my time, if that makes sense. But that's just one strategy. That's just one strategy. Dr. Burks?
I can say what she's saying is true. Dr. Ellison gave me phenomenal advice when I started experiencing burnout, and she held me accountable for allocating my time productively, not people pleasing or feeling like I had to make myself available at all times. And for me, I started using my planner. The first thing I said was, Dr. Ellison, I have my planner, I'm writing down my appointments, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, but I leave that at work. And she said, why are you leaving it at work? And I said, well, because it's work stuff. She said, no, you need one planner. Your time at work and your time at home cannot be divided. You are managing your time holistically. And she gave me a different perspective and viewing that, which was awesome. And so the next thing I know, people were putting meetings on my calendar, and now it's like, nope, declining, proposing new times, give me some context behind it. I'm not going to allow you to make me available at your convenience if it does not convenience me. Whereas before, I wanted to be a top performer. I wanted to be the friend where it's like, okay, you need me. I'm tired, but I need to be available. And then I was drained. So then my pitcher is empty and I'm trying to squeeze water to fill cups and mine is depleted and that wasn't being poured back into me. And so, again, when you become burnt out, you have to be very intentional if that's something that you would like to pull yourself out of. And don't be prideful and think like, I don't want to share, which is something feedback I've gotten before. I don't want to express that I feel burnt out or I feel overwhelmed, because then they think that that can be translated as incompetency or the inability to do your job or the inability to balance life's demands, when that's not the case. A lot of organizations have mental health programs, or they may use contract with like short-term mental health services like Lyra or Matrix, for example. And those are their ways of, if you need it, it does not have to be limited to work, because we know that life is going on at home, but just take advantage of it. So I think that there's something you can do to help manage burnout. I feel like burnout to an extent can be inevitable because life is a variable. However, it's all about how you prepare to prevent, or do you allow for it to turn into an entire inferno when you could have caught it when it was just a little sizzle or it produced just a little singe. So for me, one of my favorites, which I'll also link, if I may, Dr. Ellison. So I was reading an article and it was by Dr. Borland, and he works with Cleveland Clinic here in Ohio. And I will read verbatim what he said. He said, if you are used to going 100 miles per hour and then suddenly take your foot off of the accelerator, you are now still going at 85. However, you may feel that somehow that's not good enough because you are so used to going at 100 miles per hour. There will be times where you will need to go a little faster, but we can't sustain the 100 miles per hour all the time. And I thought that that was an amazing perspective, because we have conditioned ourselves that this is the effort we always need to give to feel productive. And then we can't understand where burnout comes into play. You don't have to be burnt out to be good at what you do. You don't have to necessarily be burnt out to manage your personal life. You just have to figure out what works for your specific situation and then go from there. So like Dr. Ellison mentioned, there's a ton of resources you can utilize. It's open to the public. Feel free, if you come across those resources and you feel that it can be beneficial at work, take it back as a resource to your leaders, take it back to your coworkers. It's public for a reason, but don't feel like you have to suffer in silence, because you don't. Dr. Ellison, I didn't want to monopolize that session, so the floor is yours.
Yes, on the Centers for Disease Control website, for the professional managers and executives in the room, or if you're an individual and you just want to go on there and peruse for yourself, they have what they call the IGLOO model, and that's IGLOO, the IGLOO model. And this is a preventive model that they like to use for burnout. It's individual, group, leadership, organizational, and overarching. So this model focuses on individual focused strategies, some of which Dr. Burks and I just talked about, group-based strategies, because maybe your section is experiencing burnout. Just like those math formulas I gave you, maybe there's too much demand and not enough resources, and you're experiencing that as a department at your job, at your workplace. And then there's leadership level strategies, and that's where you equip operational and strategic leaders to deal with occupational burnout in the workplace. And then there's organizational strategies such as policies, practices, workload, because mismanagement of these things, if there's a mismanagement of how they do workload in your workplace, or there's not proper policies or updated policies and things have changed since the pandemic, that can cause burnout in the workplace. And then there's the overarching, which is the last O in the igloo model. And that's looking beyond into the industry. Maybe the industry that you're in has changed and people have gotten lackadaisical and comfortable in the industry, and you all are being burnt out in the workplace because the industry changed but your company hasn't. Or things are changing in the community. We just had elections. As you can clearly see, the president-elect is already making his appointments. Those things affect our workplaces and then the society at large. So that, again, is the igloo model. The individual focus strategies, group-based strategies, leadership level strategies, organizational strategies, that's your policies, practices, and your workload. And then that's the overarching being the last O of the igloo model. And that's looking outward into the industry, community, and society. And if I can tell you anything, don't sit and wait for somebody to come and help you. You will drown. You will drown. Let me tell you something. As a veteran, when I was an active duty soldier and someone would pass away, they would have a memorial service. The next day, that person would be replaced. And I'm not saying that in a way to be morbid, but what I am trying to express to you is that life is going to continue to go on. Life is short. It is fleeting. It's not worth it for us to be burnt out. And as I gave you that scripture from Psalms, our worry, our stress, our anxiety, it's not going to add one moment to our life. As you can see, burnout is a whole diagnosis described as an occupational phenomenon. We learned that it involves poor personal coping or emotional management plus mismatched demands, or too many demands and not enough resources. Now that we really know what it is up to us as individuals to do the work necessary to develop coping skills, and leaders must consider the total worker by determining which approach is necessary, whether that be the individual employee focus or policy or workload or operational strategies. And if I leave you with one last thing to do, cast a vision for yourself. Sit down and write out some goals, because unless you know where you're going to when you get in your car and you turn on your navigation, you're not going to know whether to turn left or right. You're not going to know what opportunities and what things to say yes to and what to say no to if you don't know where you're going, and you will quickly find yourself burnt out. We love you. We care about you. We're here to help you. And we'll leave some of these references in the description. Dr. Burks.
We covered a lot of information. Dr. Ellison, thank you for speaking to our leaders. And if I may speak to my field or middle or janitorial staff, like we like to say, we include everybody. Remember that no one can do what you do. Don't feel pressured to conform to someone else's idea of what you should be doing. You are capable, you are more than competent, and you are no good to anyone else if you don't take care of yourself. Dr. Ellison, I use the exact same analogy. I've had so many employees that have stressed, they've been in the hospital, they're on ventilators, they're having heart issues, and then they pass away. And you know what? We send a sympathy card to their family. We will send out information to whoever their, I don't want to say their beneficiaries, I should say, I guess. And then the job is posted. So you've given your absolute all to this organization. You have stressed yourself out, like I told you, living rent-free in your head 24/7. And then for what? Just for your job to be posted and to move on to the next. So I encourage you to lean on intrinsic passion a lot. That is something that I do and I have done to help propel me forward. And with us giving you all of this information, what I would like to leave you with is, so now you understand what burnout is. You understand the resources to help cope with burnout. You understand that how it impacts you personally and professionally. So now what are you going to do about it? So I will leave you with that. Enjoy the rest of your evenings and remember to be professional.